Well, a tense day in the NAFTA talks. Efforts to reach a trade deal between Canada, Mexico, and the United States are up against a deadline imposed by the U.S. Washington wants an agreement by midnight, or it will go ahead with a deal it has already reached with Mexico. The CBC's Evan Dyer is in Ottawa. He joins us right now. So at this point, Evan, as we keep tracking these talks, what do we know about the negotiations? How are they going so far?
Well, there are some comments filtering out from people who are not directly in the negotiations, but among the group of labor and industry that is briefed by the government on the progress of negotiations that sound fairly optimistic, even talk of maybe reaching a deal this evening. But we're also hearing other signals that there are still major outstanding issues, and they include some of the issues that have been dogging these negotiations since they began. Chapter 19, dispute resolution being one of them. But there's also the threat of what might happen after an agreement, those other non-NAFTA related trade actions that the Trump administration has threatened Canada with before. Are they going to go away? That is obviously of great importance to Canada. Canada wants to know that when it makes a deal, that the deal is done and there are no swords hanging over its head. You know, we've heard some more positive language, I guess, coming from the U.S. side as well, particularly yesterday. We heard slightly less threatening language from President Trump at a rally in West Virginia, and also his trade advisor, Peter Navarro, who in the past has been well known for his inflammatory comments, went on Fox News, and he seemed to strike a slightly more positive tone as well. Let's watch him.
Tomorrow morning on Maria in the Morning, you'll have some news one way or another that'll be big and perhaps market moving. Everybody's negotiating in good faith right now as we speak, and the deadline is midnight tonight to get the text in to Congress in order to make sure this goes forward. So it's either going to be the text goes in with Mexico and the U.S., or the text goes in with all three countries.
So obviously he's leaving the door open to going ahead without Canada, but at the same time, I guess one could point out that he said everyone's negotiating in good faith. It seems like a very small reed to be grasping at, but bearing in mind that over the past week we've heard the president himself say that the White House doesn't like Canada's negotiating style or its lead negotiator. I guess you could say that that's a somewhat more positive kind of language we're hearing coming out of the White House today.
Absolutely. But you know, as I say, keep watching all of this, I'm wondering about sticking points here, because we are approaching this midnight deadline. What is essentially stopping a deal from being reached here?
Well, certainly going into this weekend, dairy supply management remained an issue. Whether that's been resolved or not, we don't know. But we do believe that Chapter 19 still remains to be resolved, that dispute resolution mechanism that allows Canada to go to a panel that would typically have 5 members, 3 from one country, 2 from another, instead of having to resolve disputes for its companies that are accused of dumping, for example, in U.S. domestic courts, where, at least in the early days of the free trade agreement, Canadians were concerned that they might not get a fair shake. That's one issue. Another issue, though, is what happens after this deal is signed. Canada wants to be able to sign this deal and say, okay, we now have free trade with the United States. There are not going to be other issues outside of NAFTA, like Section 232 tariffs, those tariffs that the Trump administration imposed on Canada back in the spring for steel and aluminum, and that President Trump keeps on threatening to impose on Canadian cars and trucks. Most recently in New York last week, he made that threat again. So what Canada wants is a guarantee that once NAFTA is signed, that threat of national security tariffs goes away. With Mexico, the U.S. resolved that with a side letter, but that side letter might not be satisfactory for Canada because it imposed export caps on Canada. Canada would ideally want to have a guarantee of no extra tariffs, no Section 232 tariffs, and no export caps.